It's showtime. Merry Christmas, everybody. I am coming to you live from the UK somewhere, and I'm going to talk to you today about atheism, atheists, and Christmas. Christmas is a wonderful time of year. I love Christmas. I really do enjoy Christmas. But there is this idea that you get from the religious sector of society. This idea that there is a war on Christmas has become part of the culture wars narrative that we see particularly in the US. And Christmas is in the middle of that culture wars narrative. And it's this idea that atheists are appropriating Christmas, and they shouldn't be allowed to celebrate Christmas because it's a Christian holiday. It's a Christian holy day. This idea that, holidays are holy days, and we're taking Christ out of Christmas. And there you go. And in fact, I want to show you an article that I have addressed on my blog, and the article is written by a Catholic on a Catholic website called, here we go, I'll just show it to you here. The article is on the Catholic Thing, and it's entitled Appropriating the Christmas Appropriators. And there's a few bits I want to read from this article because I think it's a really, really problematic article. It's a serious article, I believe, but it almost reads like, are you serious? Really? You believe this? And this particular paragraph there is a good place to start. Cultural appropriation is just one of the grave injustices recently discovered by the woke culture. Getting those buzzwords in, buzzword bingo. It is, according to authoritative sources, the inappropriate adoption of elements of a minority culture by members of a dominant culture. Most of mainstream culture has already taken Christ out of Christmas. But you might argue that by cultural appropriation, it continues to make money off of him with a capital H, Jesus, God, while abusing the rights of Christians. So we have winter holiday trees, festive lights, wreaths, holiday spending without Jesus. I'll bring you back to my good self here. And that is a great introduction to the topic. So atheists are culturally appropriating Christmas. We are stealing it off the religious types, and we have absolutely no right to celebrate the time. The article does continue. How have they offended us? Let me count the ways. So this is us. Not only have we gone through cultural appropriation, but we are abusing the rights of Christians. That's a quote from the article. And we are offending them. How have they offended us? Let me count the ways. And then the author, Reverend Pekorski, I think, then lists all the ways that we are fulfilling this idea of cultural appropriation and offending Christians. They have appropriated the Christmas tree, but the Christmas tree is a symbol of Jesus. In winter, what is evergreen becomes a sign of everlasting life, and it reminds Christians of the tree of life, an image of Christ on the cross. They have appropriated wreaths. Wreaths adorn our shopping centres and businesses, but the circular shape, without beginning or end, represents God, and the evergreens represent eternal life. They have appropriated holly, but the holly tree is another Christian symbol. The sharp leaves symbolize a crown of thorns worn by Jesus, while the berries represent drops of his blood. They have appropriated seasonal lights and candles, because, of course, candles were never used before Christianity and Christmas. But the festive glowing lights symbolize Jesus, the source of all light, Jesus in the light of the world. the star atop the tree, the poinsettia, Christmas bells. Apparently, we've appropriated Christmas bells, candy canes, St. Nicholas, and of course, Coca-Cola had nothing to do with St. Nicholas. Christmas is the season of giving, the article continues, and consumer spending. The wise men offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, Matthew 2:11. But the greatest gift of all came from the Heavenly Father. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life, John 3:16. On Christmas Day, we remember that the Saviour is a true gift of Christmas. They can't even escape Jesus when they reduce Christmas to a winter holiday. Holiday is a conflation of two words, holy day. Get it? Ha ha. So on and so forth. I want to introduce you to the idea of the genetic fallacy. So when we're arguing about the use of logic and sound arguments, and in philosophy this is all really important. We want to be as we want to lack fallacious arguments. We don't want to use them. They are unsound and can often make our arguments invalid. So here's the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy, also known as a fallacy of origins or fallacy of virtue, is a fallacy of irrelevance that is based solely on someone's or something's history, origin, or source, rather than its current meaning or context. This overlooks any difference to be found in the present situation, typically transferring the positive or negative esteem from the earlier context. In other words, a claim is ignored in favor of attacking or championing its source. So what we have here is the idea that that Christmas is this Christian holiday, and it should always be a Christian holiday. It should be what it has always been, because that's how it came to be, and we should only celebrate Christmas with reference to or adhering to its origins and its original genesis, hence the genetic fallacy. And so therefore, as soon as we start moving away from the Christian foundations of Christmas, we start doing the wrong thing, and as according to the article, abusing Christian rights, so on and so forth. Now, there are two elements I want to talk about in this little chat that we are having. And one is this genetic fallacy, right? This idea that should we ascribe meaning to something solely in relation to what originally brought it about? So that's really a conversation about meaning. So I'm going to park that for the second part. But also, what are the origins of Christmas? The fact that it's celebrated on the 25th of December or not, because it depends where you are a Christian and where you are celebrating, because in some places it's the 6th of January. In other, there is a variation in how Christmas is celebrated and when it's celebrated. So, of course, we're already seeing a little bit of cherry picking going on here. But this idea that the origins of Christmas and our celebrations of Christmas and how we celebrate Christmas are truly Christian in nature. And this is where we do a little bit of history. So I'm going to deal with that first. And the problem with taking on board the problem with arguing that Christmas is this originally Christian celebration is that many people will tell you, historians and classicists might tell you, that actually no, it's not Christian in origin. So if you're arguing you're taking Christ out of Christmas, yeah, that could be correct, because really you should have Saturn in, because it's appropriating itself Saturnalia. Arguably, I say arguably because actually it does get a little bit murky. So there have been some pretty good analyses of whether Christmas is appropriating Saturnalia and other pre-existing traditions, and there's a lot of received wisdom that it is appropriating Saturnalia, and loads of these elements of the traditions of Christmas pre-existed in say Roman traditions, or took elements even from Egypt, but or other pagan cultures, and the Christians will come back and say, actually, we've looked through some of the primary sources, and it's really difficult to find anything to back this up. But the reality is that Christmas is celebrated for a lot of the Western world on the 25th of December. And the 25th of December was a really important date because this was seen as the rebirth of the sun. This is when this, you've had the winter solstice, you've got Sol Invictus, you've got all these often agricultural and calendar-based traditions and celebrations that it seems like Christmas has or Christianity has co-opted the time as well as the traditions, so that there were pre-existing pagan traditions of starting to celebrate the birth of the new year, the birth of the sun coming back, and therefore December the 25th seemed to be a pretty good date to set Christianity to set Christmas around. And you can understand that as Christianity was starting to become more and more popular, indeed, as it eventually became the official religion of the Roman Empire, you are going to want to convince pagans. How do you convince pagans? Well, you could just tell them, this is how you're doing it. Forget how you used to do it. This is how we're doing it. We're doing it in a completely different way. Or we can say, oh, the way you used to do things, this date that you celebrated on, well, that's a good date and we like that. We're just gonna put our own traditions over that. So do you know what? We're not getting rid of everything you believed, but we're morphing it into a new belief that then remains on that date. Easter, the word Easter comes from Eostre, which is a pagan goddess. So we have this idea of syncretism where religions kind of appropriate other religions and take them into them and kind of like they join together to become this almost new religion, or is a morphing of religions together. Well, this is kind of what's going on, which is to say that we want to convince you over to our belief system. So we're going to use some of the pre-existing things and change them to our belief system, but you can keep some of those traditions. So there are some historians and classicists who would say that actually these elements of Christmas, so the evergreens and giving gifts and candles and merrymaking, these are all elements that existed with Saturnalia, for example. And I'll read you a quote here, and I'll put these quotes in the description later. I talked to you about Eostre, the Germanic goddess of dawn, who is celebrated at the spring equinox. And we then now have Easter. Surely this isn't the origins. Christ isn't the origins of Easter in that respect. It's co-opting a pre-existing spring equinox celebration. Saturnalia. During Saturnalia, work and business came to a halt. Schools and courts of law closed and normal social patterns were suspended. People decorated their homes with wreaths and other greenery and shed their traditional togas in favor of colorful clothes known as synthesis. Even slaves did not have to work during Saturnalia, but were allowed to participate in the festivities. In some cases, they sat at the head of the table while their masters served them. Instead of working, Romans spent Saturnalia gambling, singing, playing music, feasting, socializing, and giving each other gifts. Wax taper candles, called cerae, were common gifts during Saturnalia to signify light returning after the solstice, the shortest day of the year, December the 21st. Saturnalia was by far the jolliest Roman holiday. The Roman poet Catullus famously described it as the best of times. So riotous were the festivities that the Roman author Pliny reportedly built a soundproof room so that he could work during the raucous celebrations. And before the end of the 4th century, many of the traditions of Saturnalia, including giving gifts, singing, lighting candles, feasting, merrymaking, had become absorbed by the traditions of Christmas as many of us know them today. Some further information on the Christmas tree. Long before the advent of Christianity, plants and trees remained green all year. That remained green all year had a special meaning for people in winter. Just as people today decorate their homes during the festive season with pine, spruce, and fir trees, ancient peoples hung evergreen boughs over their doors and windows. In many countries, it was believed that evergreens would keep away witches, ghosts, evil spirits, and illness. And indeed, the Christmas tree is appropriating cultural ideas from Egyptians, the Romans, the Druids, Christmas bells. You know, the idea that the atheists are stealing Christmas bells of Christianity for their secular Christmas celebrations. Well, like many of the traditions, and again, this comes from another source, a history junkie, and I'll put the links in the description later. Like many of the traditions around Christmas, bells were first used in pagan winter festivals with the purpose of protecting the people of the city from evil spirits. As Christianity gained influence, the use of bells changed from a pagan purpose to a Christian one. The infamous St. Patrick would often use bells to signify the beginning and end of his lessons. So the ideas that we saw in that article, which I will share again because some of you might have just come in here, but we had this article from a Catholic website that sort of talked about, so the Catholic thing, appropriating the Christmas appropriators, and it lists all these ways that we have taken the Christ out of Christmas, and we have used cultural appropriation to nick all these ideas, and it's just part of woke culture, and you know, the idea that most of mainstream culture has already taken Christ out of Christmas, as if, say, in America, most people are not Christian. Well, you know, not sure that holds. And it's somehow abusing their rights. How dare we? How dare you? It says here. How dare we? And then it lists all the things that I've looked at, and hopefully at least shown that the possibility that these things pre-existed Christianity. So there you go. Now back to me again. Let me just make sure I can see you. Yeah. So now, the caveat I gave earlier is that some classicists say, well, actually, you say that all these traditions pre-existed in Saturnalia, and actually the primary sources are really difficult to find good evidence that this was the case. But the notion that Christians can make claim to giving gifts, to using candles, to using evergreen greenery to represent certain things, so bells, so on and so forth, and the idea that December the 25th and around the winter solstice is somehow, you know, safeguarded as a Christian thing, and there's this kind of Christian exceptionalism that means that these things are the purview of Christianity alone, is obscene nonsense. It's just ridiculous. So although there might be a bit of nuance in finding really good details of this in the primary sources, the idea on the flip side is that actually we can't find particularly good primary sources for Christianity stamping this tradition on the 25th and first starting to do that. It seems to be something that morphed over time, which you know leads you to believe it was a thing that was an element of syncretism, the element of, you know, taking pre-existing traditions and co-opting them for Christianity. In other words, this article is entirely hypocritical. It's entirely hypocritical. Let's see what people have said in the comments. So, Christmas is for children and the poor, a day to humble those who have, for those who have not. Interesting point. We'll come on to the meaning thing a little later. Thanks for that. Melody Joy says, last year I was still a believer. Wow. So things are still pretty fresh. And I had learned about the pagan origins of Christmas, and I didn't want to celebrate it. This year, as a deconvert, I am. And again, we're going to come on to this idea of meaning. So thank you. Thanks for some of you saying the very kind things. Belief leads to ignorance, doubts lead to understanding. I think it's always good to doubt anything. You know, we need to be skeptical and critical. That's why I was saying that actually looking at those primary sources, it isn't quite so obvious that everything comes from Saturnalia, but even though it could do, but actually finding the evidence for that might be more difficult than one might think. So again, you know, we need to be skeptical and critical. But that applies just as much to Christians here, if not more. You know, taking received wisdom from a 2,000-year-old book is pretty problematic. But there you go. You know, we need to be critical of everyone and everything. but particularly, like I say on a lot of my videos, particularly ourselves. I think it was the great physicist Richard Feynman who said, you know, the easiest person to fool is yourself. So, you know, be aware of that. And here we have, I'm actively changing, so Melody Joy again, my thought processes and want to pass it on to them, my children, she's talking about, critical thinking. I did another video on this, is how to be an atheist parent, which is, and I don't want to sort of take this conversation off on a tangent, but don't teach the conclusion, teach the process. I don't teach my children to be atheists. I'm really big on that, because actually one day as a kind of 8-year-old, I think one of my twins went, what do you learned something about God at school, and said, do you believe in God, Daddy? And I was like, no, I don't, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. And he said to me, but I want to believe what you believe. And that to me was massively important, because it just shows you the power of the elders. I would explain it in evolutionary terms, the idea that we believe our elders as a shortcut to not. So if an elder or someone in authority in your family says, don't eat that berry, I should believe them, because that's much easier to believe them rather than try the berry and it poison me and causes me harm or I die. And so therefore there is an evolutionary reason that we might believe our elders and bestow respect upon our elders, because actually it has benefit to us. Now the problem is it can also be co-opted, that kind of mechanism, to bestow inaccurate claims on us. And I would argue that's how religion sort of maintains that look at what my son said, I want to believe what you believe. Oh, what if I believe something bonkers? And there's a real kind of tension in me, because I want to tell him, no, don't believe in God, because it's nonsense. But if I do that, I'm giving him a conclusion with nothing below it, and it's just a castle in the air, and that's really irresponsible. No, I'm not going to teach you the conclusion. I'll tell you what I believe, but please don't believe it because I believe it. Let's talk about what goes on underneath, and you can believe whatever you want, but make sure it's pretty solidly founded. So there you go. This sounds interesting. So I'm also listening to audio book Raising Freethinkers. I know Dale McGowan, a friend of mine, has written a book on sort of raising atheist children as well. I've not read it. I think Dan Arell has written a book too. So interesting. There's getting more and more stuff out there to help you with that. Anyway, back to, thanks for all those comments. It's really, really good. Getting back to the conversation at hand, which is so the two things going on there. What are the origins of Christmas? And I would argue very strongly that it's hugely unlikely that the origins of Christmas as a celebration, as a period, and what we do at Christmas are entirely within Christianity. I'm not denying that a wreath being in a circle can represent for Christians eternal life and something yada yada to do with God, and that candles can represent Jesus being the light of the world and whatever. Yes, because what you're doing there, you're taking pre-existing ideas like a candle and a wreath that are used for other traditions and other meanings for other people, and you are co-opting the thing and putting on your new meaning onto that, and saying this wreath now means this bell now means that, this candle now means this. And that's fine, but understand it for what it is. Okay, understand what you are doing there, or where your tradition has come from and how it came to be. Because that leads me on to the second point, which is going to be about meaning. Now, I could go back and talk a lot about fundamental philosophy, and I might dip into that in a second. But I want to just bring in a couple of ideas about how we do meaning in terms of holidays. So in Britain, in the UK, we have 6-week summer holidays, right? They are the longest holidays of the year. Why are they long? Well, legend it goes, and actually this has been challenged. This might be a bit of an urban myth, but just bear with me. Legend has it that, very recent legend, that farmers needed help on the fields before and during harvest time. So schools had 6 week summer holidays so that families could take their children away to work on the farmlands in order to help with the harvesting. Okay, and that's where the 6 week summer holiday came from. May not have actually come about like that, but the fact that we don't know 100% how the 6 week summer holiday came is kind of entirely my point, because now we have this 6 week summer holiday that the kids really enjoy. Parents kind of get tired of it after 6 weeks and having to sort out childcare for the children, but whatever. The idea is that we don't use it for harvesting farmland. I mean, that's definitely not what happens. However, that is the origins, supposedly, of the 6 week summer holiday. Take May Day. May Day in Britain, we have a bank holiday, which means that if you have a contract, it's a public holiday, so you are paid not to go to work. It's part of your, or you have a day off and you're not paid, but it depends what your contract is. But we have quite a few. We have 8 public bank holiday dates throughout the year where this kind of thing happens. But let's look at the May bank holiday date. Okay, May Day. In some countries around the world, that's become a Labor Day. So it's celebrated for, labor rights and so on and so forth. May in the UK, it's more about, originally it was about, and this goes back to the 14th century, you'd have a maypole and people dancing around the maypole, and you'd have Morris dances, very traditional form of dancing where you have bells on your ankles and stuff, and you do this pretty traditional crazy dance. And you're celebrating summer coming on, and the fruits of summer and so on and so forth. Now, here's the thing. Tell me one person that doesn't go to work on the May bank holiday, right, which is pretty much most people. Tell me what they're celebrating that day. Are they dancing around a maypole? Almost certainly not. Are they Morris dancing? Almost certainly not. So that however, this is the argument the Christians are using, is that, hang on, you're co-opting Christmas to celebrate in a way that's not in accordance with its origins. That's what we do for May bank holiday. We have a lie-in, we watch some TV in our pajamas, or maybe we have a long weekend. We go and see some family, or go to Brussels or Paris for a long weekend. We're not dancing around a maypole. Okay, so can you accept that, Christian? Because if you can accept that, then you should have no gripes about Christmas being used in a way that isn't adhering to its Christian origins. And you can think of all sorts of different examples of this, because the Christian is using what I said is the genetic fallacy. Okay, so maybe we need to talk a little bit about meaning, because my opinion is that there is no objective meaning out there. We can see this when we talk about words. I might have the word hero, okay? And I might have an example of who I think is a hero. I might define that word differently to you. So I've got, say, Brad Kemble there saying, hey, my idea of a hero is this. And I might say, oh, my idea of a hero is Mahatma Gandhi, or this sportsman, or this politician over here. And we'll disagree, because our ideas of the heroes are different, and our exemplifications of those ideas might be different. Because meaning doesn't exist out here. It exists in here. And what happens is, when we agree on meaning, we write dictionaries and encyclopedias, because we go, oh, we have a consensus. We go, oh, we use that word to mean this, and we use that word to mean that. Okay, if we all agree on that, let's write it down in the dictionary. Dictionaries are what are called these days are descriptive. They're not prescriptive, right? They don't prescribe how we should use words. They describe how we do use words. Take the word literally now. Here's a great example of an interesting word. Literally is a contronym. Contronym is a word that means the opposite to what it means. That sounds pretty weird. So literally used to mean, more often than not, literally, if something was literally happening, it was happening in a very sort of concrete manner, in the way that you understood it to be happening by the words that are being used. Now you hear people saying, oh, he's playing football. He had such a good game. He was literally on fire. You're like, no, he wasn't. He wasn't literally on fire. He was metaphorically on fire. You're using literally to mean the opposite of what it meant. But now some dictionaries are starting to put definitions of literally as metaphorically, because that's how people are using it. Language evolves and changes, and dictionaries reflect that. The idea here is that there is no ether out there, objective ether, where there is a definition of the word literally that we are trying to reflect in our usage. This is a Platonic way of thinking. Plato used to think there was a perfect forms of everything that existed, and we would be like sitting in a cave looking at a shadow of that perfect form on the back wall of the cave with a fire going, and it was kind of imperfect. No, these things don't exist out there. Everything exists in here. I am what's called a conceptual nominalist, which means I don't think abstract ideas exist out there. And we can talk about morality, we can talk about the ideas of a hero, we can talk about personhood, we can talk about anything. But they all exist as concepts in our individual heads. Sometimes, often, we agree because we have similar brains and we have similar upbringings and we live in similar societies. So we agree on these ideas of morality and we agree on many of these ideas like a hero. But sometimes we disagree. When we disagree, we have to use arguments to try and convince the other people to our point of view. But we are not reflecting some objective ether that is out there. And it's really important that I tell you this, because it kind of underwrites what I'm going to talk to you about meaning. So this is what I do in my book, Why I'm Atheist and Not a Theist, which is to say that this is ontology, which is the existence of everything, in this case abstract ideas. And I talk about this at the beginning of the book because I build everything on that, and it's really important to understand the bottom of the wall so that you can understand each step of building on top of that. But you've got to get it right at the bottom to get it right at the top. So the bottom is, what are abstract ideas? They are concepts in our heads, but they don't exist out there in the ether, because there is no abstract ether. There's conception in our heads, and we seek to agree with each other. Okay, so this applies to meaning as like meaning of words, like I was talking about, but also in terms of meaning in general. So when we say, what is the meaning of Christmas? There is no true meaning of Christmas. All of us will have different understandings of what Christmas is. Christians will have an idea of Christmas that very solidly involves Christ. That's where we get the word from. But just like May Day, dancing around maypoles, we don't necessarily have to do what was originally done. And I've also argued that that wasn't where it originally came from anyway. There were pagan origins to these ideas and the way that we celebrate Christmas. But even if you forget all that pagan stuff and say, okay, that's nonsense, it really, all of these ideas of wreaths and presents and candles, they all came from Christians, and it's all from Christianity. Even if you agree with that, so what? Christmas is what you make of it. So for me, Christmas is about family, about enjoyment, about good television and bad television, about feasting and seeing people you haven't seen for ages, coming back to where their families live or whatever. It's about, it's even about things like Christmas carols, and they may be religious. So what? They're lovely songs. Who cares? And they're part of my cultural heritage. It doesn't mean, I should be Christian to enjoy Christmas. And it doesn't mean that all those things that I enjoy have to be imbued with overtly Christian ideas and understanding. So that's kind of where I'm at, which is Christmas is for me something that's very different than it is for a Christian, and I'm okay with that. If a Christian comes up to me and says, "You're an atheist, you can't enjoy Christmas, you can't celebrate Christmas," I can say, "Yes, I can." Do you celebrate the bank holiday? Do you take that day off work and have fun? Do you dance around a maypole? No. Well, get over it. I'm taking this time, which is about all the things that I think it's about, and that's good enough for me. And if I enjoy that, so be it. Who are you to tell me what my meaning should be? And this is where it gets a bit like Kantian. So Immanuel Kant, who's a German philosopher, an idealist of sorts, said Ding an dich, or Ding an sich. Get it the wrong way around, it sounds rude. Ding an sich, which is things in themselves. And he used to say, you cannot know a thing in itself. So I get this pen, right? I can't know what it's like to be this pen. I can't know this pen because I am not this pen. So what I have is my own brain, and I conceive this pen and I understand it within my own experience machine, my brain. And there's always a subjective interpretation of what this pen is. I can't have an objective knowledge of this because I am not this. All of you guys watching this video will have a subjective understanding of what this pen is, a subjective knowledge of this pen, and any kind of meaning that you might be able to derive from this pen. Same with anything you see, other people, so on and so forth. And it gets really interesting here because you're like, what is the objective idea of, say, John Edwards, one of the commenters there? So John Edwards, is my idea of John Edwards, right? Or John Edwards' best friend, is his idea of him more valid than John Edwards' own idea of himself? And who's right? Is there a right? Of course, there's no right. We all have concepts of everything. None of them are right. They just are, right? So you know, my friends might have an idea of who I am that is actually more accurate than my own idea because I'm self-deluded, right? So I might think that I'm really kind and generous and X and Y, right? And my friends might go, you know, Jonathan thinks he's really kind and generous. Actually, he's tight as a gnat's chuff. So, like, you know, and they might be more accurate than me, in which case they've got a better understanding of Jonathan Pierce than Jonathan Pierce does. Who's right? Oh, wow. Okay. So there we go. It looks like everything is subjective. Okay, let's bring that back to meaning. So meaning is subjective. So whatever meaning you ascribe to anything, including your own life, your meaning of life is what you make of it. And for me, you know, meaning in terms of Christmas is what I make of it. I don't want to enjoy this time because of its relevance to Jesus. I have my own reasons for celebrating and enjoying Christmas. Things are what they become. It's really important. Things are what they become. Meaning is what you make it. Traditions are as much to be made as received. Traditions are as much to be made as received. So we have our Christmas traditions, but just because that's how they came to us doesn't mean that's how they should be. And that's how they should always be. That is perhaps what tradition might mean. And we could talk about political psychology here. So in terms of conservatives against liberals, we know that small c conservatives are much more psychologically aligned to purity and tradition and this idea of keeping things as they were. That's the conserving things. That's why they're conservatives, literally the clues in the name. So if you're conservative, and think about a religious person who's more likely to be conservative, you're all about keeping the tradition the same through time, keeping it purity. It's really interesting how, like, the psychology of religion and psychology of politics and all these things interact and intersect. Now, a liberal is known, small L liberal is known in political psychology to be more concerned with fairness, lack of harm, but also openness to new experiences. So when you talk about conserving a tradition, against being open to a new experience, which might be changing a tradition and a new thing. We have this idea of liberalism against conservatism. And then you can see that play out here in this idea of what Christianity is, or sorry, about what Christmas is. Traditions are as much to be made as received. I think that's really important to what I'm trying to say here. I mean, I love Christmas, as I've said, the food, the family, the friends, the tree, the decorations, the merriment, the TV, the songs, the carols, even the hymns, even. The endless wishing that it would snow, but it rarely ever does at Christmas, at least where I live. And the list is hardly anything overtly Christian. And, you know, just for the record, I eat Easter eggs too. So what? Because let's face it, Easter eggs aren't really about the resurrection of the God-man spirit at Easter. So we need to book the Christ back into Christmas is a really interesting statement because, well, for me at any rate, Christ was never really there. So there you go. That's my opinion of atheism and Christmas. As Brad says here, life is what you make it. So thank you for that, Brad. You're absolutely right. Life is indeed what you make it. People get really caught up in what a thing is now and not how it came about and originated. Easier to see acceleration than speed, I guess. And of course, both are interesting and relevant, but it shouldn't be how it, you know, how something is now is not necessarily how it should always be. In the same way that how something was shouldn't be how it always should be. Shouldn't be how it is now. I mean, as long as you've got good reasons to do the things you do and to believe the things you do and have the meaning that you say things have, then, you know, that should be enough. So here we have some Christians say existence is meaningless if when you die, you cease to exist. Now, this is where you start having a talk about Christmas and things go off left field, right? This is your big existential question. And I will do a separate video on this, believe you me, because this is super important. And this is the idea that unless meaning transcends earthly material existence, unless it is eternal, unless it is ultimate meaning, then there is no meaning. You're like, nah, not really. No. It's just a different kind of meaning. But this idea of ultimate meaning, just because it transcends your earthly life and goes on, so say you live in an afterlife, in heaven or hell, you know, that meaning is still subjective that you have, but it just goes on eternally subjectively. This idea that that if you had an eternal God that has a meaning for you, then this is someone prescribing, this is some other entities prescribing meaning to you. I don't want your meaning. You can tell me what I should believe about the meaning of something, but that's wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll make my own meaning. If I made a spade, right, in my back garden, I said to that spade, your meaning, your purpose is to dig stuff up, right? Your meaning of life is to be, you should find meaning in digging, right? That spade, if it was a sentient spade, should be able to say, screw you, Jonathan Pierce. I know you made me, but I want to hang out with the trowels and the forks and have parties all the time. That's my meaning. I don't want to dig stuff up. Screw you. Fair enough. So if you know, I think it's much more noble to create your own meaning than take on a meaning that's been prescribed to you. And I think that's hugely important. I think it's far more noble to actually derive meaning from your life and work it out for yourself rather than being told your meaning and purpose by something else. Now, I'm not saying you can't align your own meaning with some entity you believe exists, like God, if you align your meaning with what you think God's meaning is for you, or purpose, then that's fine, whatever, but make your meaning your own. This we can take back to the Christmas thing. Make Christmas your own thing. Have its own meaning for you. Build those memories of all the Christmases you've had and those expectations of Christmases you will have. Make it a time for you, your family, your friends, for considering people less fortunate than yourself. You know, you can make it a spiritual time. You can make it a time imbued with meaning and something that transcends who you are and talks about other people. You can do that. Go for it. I laud that. But don't just make it about Christ and Christianity. Because again, even for Christians, how do you know even you are correct? There are 42,000 different denominations of Christianity. Have you got the right one? Is your meaning about everything you do in Christianity more have greater truth value and greater, you know, any kind of value than all the other thousands of denominations that also exist? And you know, it all gets so things are subjective. There you go. Thank you, Brad. You know, talking is always good. So what other things can we say here? Hypothetical for a Christian: if instead of eternal life you get a limited 1 trillion year afterlife, would existence still be pointless? And they would have to argue yes, because if you're talking about ultimate meaning, I think ultimate meaning, Christians are just talking about you can only get meaning if it's eternal. So whether it's, I mean, you know, how long's a piece of string? You can talk about an earthly existence of 70 years or 1 trillion years, you know, and whether it's earthly and heaven or just earth or whatever, it's just the time's the issue here. And I think Christians really many Christians really only have this argument in the context of ultimate meaning being eternal meaning, and the only thing that they can you know, utilize to get that ultimate eternal meaning is God, because God's the only thing that can be eternal in their worldview. So therefore, when they say meaning, what they're saying is kind of a circular argument, because what they're just saying is God, right? Ultimate meaning, it means you have to have a God, and therefore meaning has to have a God. So they say to atheists, you can't have meaning. What they're really saying is you can't have God meaning, because God meaning is ultimate meaning is meaning. So I think it's their way of smuggling in God necessarily, and I think that's a bit of a problem. And just a few more points. Again, spades make really good fulcrums depending on how on what they're made of. So of course you can, you know, and a spade can maybe find purpose in its own fulcrum. I don't know what the verb is to fulcrum, but maybe, you know, if you had a sentient spade, there you go. But of course, that's really interesting. So you know, the purpose of this pen is to write. But I can maybe put it down there by the door to stop the door closing. It's now got a new purpose, because, you know, I can find meaning and purpose subjectively in anything. And the same can be said for Christmas. So there you go. He says, well, actually, no, I wasn't talking about fulcrum. I actually meant lever, or for my American friends, lever. I haven't been conscious long today, but of course, lever or fulcrum, it doesn't really matter. Better late than never. Hi from Washington. I'm just coming up to finishing. Oh, dagnammit. But what we have been saying is twofold. Just to go over what I've been saying for those who are coming late. One, the origins of Christmas are not in Christianity and in Christ, but actually many of the traditions pre-existed Christianity and are pagan in nature. So when the Christian says you're taking Christ out of Christmas and all these things like bells and wreaths and Christmas trees and gift giving and candles, they're all Christian traditions, and therefore, you shouldn't be able to celebrate Christmas and all these things and have all these things in your home if you're not doing it in a Christian way, or with reference to the birth of Christ. I say, well, actually, you're not doing it with reference to Saturn and all these other pagan origins. And the second part is, even if I shelve that argument and say, okay, all those traditional elements of Christmas that we understand now have their basis in Christianity, I can change that meaning that I ascribe to that time and that celebration if I want, because I am me and you can't tell me what to do with my own meaning. And if I want to enjoy Christmas in a secular atheistic way, then I can and I will. And do you know what? I can and I do. I love Christmas. Get over it. So there you go. That's essentially what we said, with a little sort of, trip down a couple of philosophical cul-de-sacs. Thank you so much for coming in. Are there any questions you have down in the comments section, in the live comments for me? And if not, I will sign off and say thank you very much for all of your support. And of course, have a very Merry Christmas. And you can do that, having a very Merry Christmas, as an atheist, or as a Hindu, or as a Muslim, or as a deist, or an agnostic, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Your meaning is your own. And I just want to hit you with the thing I said quite a few times earlier, which was, again, things are what they become. Meaning is what you make it. And traditions are as much to be made as received. Merry Christmas, everybody. Big love from the UK. And thanks for those very nice thoughts. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Thank you. And I agree with me 100%. And Merry Christmas right back to you. Over and out.